Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Welcome to Japan, Miss Elf. Great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I think this is a very cute anime, really neat premise. I am pretty much a novice when it comes to the isekai genre. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things that I've watched that would be like outside of anime as well as anime that are isekais that I would have never realized were isekais. But it's like, you know, because I went into this knowing the premise of it, but because I remember reading the premise of it, but I didn't remember certain details because in my head I thought like, okay, once he brought Marie here to Japan, I'd say here, even though I'm living in the US, but you get what I'm trying to say, brought her to Japan, that she couldn't go back. They'd have to find a way to try and get her back. But it seems like this is going to be like both a isekai and a reverse isekai, which I never knew the term reverse isekai existed until fairly recently when I was watching Demon Lord 2099. That was the first time I'd ever come across the term reverse isekai. But yeah, like probably the earliest isekai I ever came across was the Dot Hack series, like Signs and the original 4 video games were like my introduction to that. But I know Sword Art Online is a big one, but like I haven't watched that, so I don't know the rules of Sword Art Online. Because I was like, I don't think, do they ever leave that game? Aren't they stuck inside it? I think that's one of those isekais where they're stuck. So I wasn't sure how this one was going to work. I knew they were in Japan, but like I said, I thought Marie was going to be stuck here with Kazuhiro, or rather, wait, is it Kazuhiro or Kazuhiko? Because the fake name is Kazuhiho, but I can't remember if it's Kazuhiro or Kazuhiko. Either way, let's just call him Kazu for short. Or just call him by his last name. Was it Katase? Either way, who we find out he's just a regular office worker. His colleagues are like, oh, we're going to go to this thing after work. And he's like, no, I'm just going to go home. Because for him, it's like, why like go hang out when I could go on these grand adventures in my dreams? So we also don't know how long quote unquote Kazuhiko has been doing this, because he said the reason why his name is Kazuhiko is because basically when he came to this world at first, he ended up making an error and instead of Kazuhiro, it ended up being Kazuhiko, which kind of implies he's been dreaming of this place for most of his life, because he was an actual kid when he was here, but he kind of brings it up this episode like, oh, I guess I'm still a kid. I wonder, the way he makes it seem like, it doesn't seem like he comes here every time he dreams, but maybe he does. Because the fact is, he's still like, oh, I'm still looking like a kid. But that might have just been just for the audience sake. But that's why I was curious, like, does he not come here every... Because, I mean, a lot of times, you know, there is a whole thing of you don't remember your dreams. So sometimes you might not dream at all, because that is a thing for people. So I'm curious, is it a situation of he doesn't always go to that world? Like maybe 1 out of every 4 times, or maybe 1 out of every 3 times, or maybe he does dream every single time he goes to sleep. But yeah, like the worlds exist on different like time frames. So he's 25 in, you know, I don't want to say the real world, but like the human world. And then in the fantasy world, he's probably still like a teenager. So, but yeah, time passes differently between these different worlds and realms. So, but we get introduced to Maria Bell, or Marie, and obviously there's a kindred spirit. Like they seem to be friends, but also it seems like, I don't know if this series is going to go down the route of a romantic angle. It seems like it would, but nothing I've seen has labeled this necessarily a romance series. But maybe it is, and I just have, maybe some places just doesn't have it labeled as one. Either way, they go into a dungeon. Not even a dungeon, it's ruins, and it's like, oh, this civilization, how did it die out? And it's like, maybe it was some kind of like essentially disease. But for Kazuhiro, it's like, well, how's that when you live in a world that's so like magically, technologically advanced? How could something like that happen? You know, so I don't know if there's going to be anything to that or whatever, those ruins they examine. But when they go in there, they end up running into a monster. And she's like, oh, we got to be careful. And then he goes charging. I'm like, you're about to kill it or something? I was like, kind of feel bad for the guy. And then they touch hands and they're like, yay. I was like, what? So, and once again, little interesting world building things. He speaks. At first, I was like, "Oh, is it an automatic thing?" Because he's talking to Marie in Elvish, but this monster, he's talking to him in a completely different language. Which I wonder, do all the monsters share the same language, or do different species of monsters? Because he's kind of like a lizard man or something. Maybe they have a very different speech than dragons, if dragons even communicate in a more traditional sense or whatnot. So he even says like, "Oh yeah, it took me like 3 years," because he's like, "Yeah, I used to get chased around by monsters all the time, so it took me like 3 years to learn their language so I could communicate with them." Because I love, he's like, "Oh, Kazuhiko, what are you doing here?" It's like, "Oh, it looks like you brought Miss Elf too." It's like, "Yeah, but she only kind of wants me for the lunch boxes." He's like, "Oh, look at you, I'm envious of you, buddy," and kind of gives him a warning about the dragon later on. I'm like, I love that. And it kind of makes sense why you be weary of monsters and learn to communicate with them, because you're like, I'm tired of getting killed, because every time he dies, if when he falls asleep in this world, he wakes up in his world. But also when he dies in his world, he automatically wakes up in his world. So it's kind of a thing of, yeah, I probably don't want to I want to enjoy this to the fullest, and the last thing I need is to be dropping dead for monsters. So if I'm able to communicate, I can heavily reduce the amount of deaths I have, and so I get to kind of enjoy this world a little bit more. But they end up coming across a dragon, specifically an arcane dragon, and it breathes fire on them. But when Kazuhiro wakes up, it wasn't alone, because he was grabbing onto Marie at the time. He dragged her along. Interestingly enough, she shows up butt naked, which even he's like, why does that work that way? Because he never wakes up butt naked in that world. Kind of seems like he didn't, but, maybe traveling from his world to her world, the rules are a little different. Obviously, it's just, and obviously, for fan service purposes, they had to do that. I mean, once again, it's just, they just had to. It's anime, so you kind of have to include the fan service. You just can't go without it. I also felt so bad when he had to go buy lingerie, because the women in the department store were just like, "Oh my god, he's staring so deeply," and he's just trying to get everything as quickly as possible. He's like, "Next time, I gotta bring Marie with me," because it's like the last thing you want to do is seem like some creepy pervert stalking the women's department store for underwear. So. But rather than being completely freaked out, Marie's super excited about it. She's like, "Oh my god, you live in a tall building? You must be extremely rich. Oh my god, let's go explore the city." She's so excited. Puts on her new clothes. They go out. She's getting he drives her to where they're gonna go eat, and she's obviously crunched up in the car, being so she's got her legs on the dashboard because she's freaking out. And I love that you look that he's going so slow just not to freak her out, so it's this is the part of the things where she's kind of scared and freaked out. But yeah, so Kazuhiro sits her down while they're eating, and obviously she doesn't know Japanese, so which is kind of a neat little thing of knowing, okay, so the experiences he has in that world translate over into this world, considering he can understand Marie, but Marie's like, I can't read or understand anything in Japan. She can't understand Japanese, but even in this world, he can still understand Elvish. So it's I guess it's imprinted in his brain. So, it's kind of like a weird example to use is Naruto and the Shadow Clone situation. The Shadow Clone, whatever it's doing over here, when it disappears, that experience comes back to Naruto. So I guess Kazuhiro's in a similar sense. Once again, whatever you learn is mapped inside of your brain. That knowledge doesn't disappear just because you come into this world. So maybe that's all there is to it. Who knows if they'll really get so in-depth about it. But once again, little world building things like that I think are so neat. And so it's just about him showcasing and showing off all this delicious food to her, which this is I think besides just being a cooking anime, an isekai anime, it is a cooking anime, which this is actually my first one. I'm aware of some, I think it's Food Wars. I'm aware of it. I've just never watched it. I've just seen bits and clips and stuff, but this will be the first time I've ever watched a cooking anime. Obviously, they'll probably have to really test a lot of these theories about how this whole situation works, that it's from Kazuhiro's perspective, he's if Marie just goes to sleep in this world, she'll wake up in her world. Now, maybe we'll run into some complications there. It might be a thing of they need to go to sleep holding each other, just like him bringing her into this world was him holding onto her when they got teleported back. So he probably is the portal, so they have to probably be in physical contact for it to work like that, maybe. So it's going to be interesting because obviously he took a day off from work, but eventually he's going to have to go back to work and try and balance that out. Like, for as long as she's here, like I said, we'll have to probably wait. I'm getting to this a little late. I believe it's up to episode 3 now, if I'm not mistaken, because I believe this is coming out on Fridays. But yeah, this is up to episode 3. So I'm curious to see what's been covered so far on whether or not, like, do we find out, are there complications or are there kind of stipulations and conditions to getting back to that other world, or are they a little more simplistic of like kind of like all they have to do is be holding each other, which is embarrassing and obviously, but I'm curious to see where this goes. Like I said, it just seems like a fun, cute anime, just with kind of this neat, fantastical element to it, but also just like this real world element to it. So as both worlds kind of collide, we do see that black haired character in the intro. I think she's in the intro and the outro. I'd assume she's from Japan and not from that fantasy world. Because I was about to say, I'm curious, could he bring over anyone else, or is it going to be a thing of just because she was the one he brought over, he could never bring over anyone else? They're bound together, and so like she's the only one that could ever go to and from this world. It's interesting too because like he's got the whole work thing, but she's going to like this. I don't think it was an academy. It's something she's working on, like a sorcery guild. She's a big part of it, and that's like a lot of her work. And because time works differently, it seems like time moves faster in Kazuhiro's world than it does her world, so we'll see. It could also, once again, I'm doing a lot of speculating. Once again, the next few episodes will give us maybe more clarity on this stuff, whether or not they bother diving into it. But it'd be really interesting, or if it turns out Kazuhiro, his time works a little differently when he's in that other world. But what if like the same thing's applicable on the opposite end of things for Marie, so that's while she's in Japan, time works a little differently for her. So I think that'd be kind of interesting, but we'll see. Like I said, just a cute series. Just seems like it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm interested to see the wild cooking adventures this duo gets into and where it all takes them. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.